Groups of Moabite raiders used to invade the land each spring. Once when some Israelites were burying a man, they spied a band of three of these raiders, so they hastily threw the corpse into the tomb of Elisha and fled. But as soon as the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man revived and jumped to his feet. We get this story about some raiders trying to ditch a body at Elisha's tomb, but then the person that they ditched there, supposedly dead, touched the bones of Elisha and got better again. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. We're at 2 Kings chapter 13, and last chapter, Joash was king. He got the temple all fixed up, but had to hand over a bunch of sacred objects, I believe, is how they were described. Basically as a peace deal with King Hazael of Aram. You know, to prevent Jerusalem from getting seriously attacked. And then at the end of the chapter, he was assassinated. Looks like we're flipping over to Israel anyway, so that may or may not be directly related. So let's see what happens here in chapter 13. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, began to rule over Israel in the 23rd year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 17 years. But he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He followed the example of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, continuing the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he allowed King Hazael of Aram and his son Ben-Hadad to defeat them repeatedly. Hold up, wasn't there a Ben-Hadad that was king of Aram before Hazael? Or am I remembering that wrong? I don't know. Either way. Lots of problems being caused by the Arameans. Because God's like, well, Israel's not following me. So, it's, you know, maybe I'll remove some of my protection from them. At the very least. But, also, says Jehoahaz began to rule in Israel in the 23rd year of Joash's reign. That was, like, right around the time when, you know, the priests in Judah were essentially commanded to, you know, get some serious work done on the temple repairs. Just finding the timing of that interesting. Okay. Verse 4. Then Jehoahaz prayed for the Lord's help, and the Lord heard his prayer, for he could see how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. So the Lord provided someone to rescue the Israelites from the tyranny of the Arameans. Then Israel lived in safety again, as they had in former days. But they continued to sin, following the evil example of Jeroboam. They also allowed the Asherah pole in Samaria to remain standing. Finally, Jehoahaz's army was reduced to 50 charioteers, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Aram had killed the others, trampling them like dust under his feet. The rest of the events in Jehoahaz's reign, everything he did, and the extent of his power, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoahaz died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son, Jehoash, became the next king. See, now the Hebrew there says Joash, even though for Joash who ruled in Judah, the Hebrew said Jehoash. It's like reversed here. But it says they're variant spellings, so like, again, it's similar enough that I don't think it makes any... I don't think there's any specific meaning attached to that slight difference in spelling. So, Israel's being attacked a lot. Jehoahaz prays to the Lord for help, and because of that and how severely Israel was being oppressed by the Arameans, the Lord decides to... It just says the Lord provided someone to rescue the Israelites. Doesn't say who, doesn't say how, just says that it happened. But they still weren't following the Lord anyway. And so, yeah, Israel's forces are pretty weak by this point. And then Jehoahaz dies, his son becomes the next king. Alright, moving on to verse 10. Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, began to rule over Israel in the 37th year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 16 years, but he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. The rest of the events in Jehoash's reign and everything he did, including the extent of his power and his war with King Amaziah of Judah, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoash died, he was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Then his son Jeroboam II became the next king. Now it's already mentioning a war with Judah, but like a war between Israel and Judah in this. And that's, I mean, you know things are going bad when that happens. Just bad in general for the collective group of God's people and their descendants. Otherwise, it really doesn't say much about Jehoash as king. You know, it's still following the order of the kings, though, so gotta at least get a general sense of how things went while he was king. Alright. Verse 14. When Elisha was in his last illness, King Jehoash of Israel visited him and wept over him. My father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hand on the bow. And Elisha laid his own hands on the king's hands. Then he commanded, open that eastern window. And he opened it. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram. For you will completely conquer the Arameans at Ephek. Alright, gonna pause there for a sec. Because the Arameans are the ones that they've been having all kinds of troubles with for a while. And yet Elisha's here prophesying victory over them. Complete victory. It says you will completely conquer. So, anyway. So, now, it doesn't say this outright, but, like, the mental image that I get reading this, where it says, when Elisha was in his last illness, that sounds to me like another way of saying Elisha was, like, on his deathbed. So, so the image I get is him being rather weak, frail, sick, of course. And so I almost, like, picture Jehoash doing all the movement in this situation. And Elisha's just like, okay, go get these things. Alright, put your hand on the bow. Elisha also puts his hand on the bow. And he's like, okay, open up the window, shoot an arrow. There you go. It's... I don't know. That's just the mental picture that I get. Kind of one last positive bit of prophecy before he then ends up dying, probably from this illness. Okay. On to verse 18. Then he said, he being Elisha, I assume, "Now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground." So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. The man of God was angry with him. "You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. "Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. Then Elisha died and was buried. Groups of Moabite raiders used to invade the land each spring. Once when some Israelites were burying a man, they spied a band of 3 of these raiders, so they hastily threw the corpse into the tomb of Elisha and fled. But as soon as the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man revived and jumped to his feet." Okay, I feel like we're kind of mixing stories at this point, so let me pause there for a bit. So, the first arrow, I guess, being out to the east, I mean, that's where the Arameans would have been relative to Israel. So, that was just the general sign that, like, alright, these enemies to the east, you are going to have victory over them. But then expanding upon that was the whole striking the ground thing, and apparently each time Jehoash struck the ground was supposed to resemble a victory that he would have over the Arameans. Which is why Elisha's like, you should have struck it 5 or 6 times. Because with that many victories, it's more likely that, like, all of Aram would have been wiped out. I mean, he even says, then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Implying that 3 times isn't enough. So then he died, and we get this story about some raiders trying to ditch a body at Elisha's tomb, but then the person that they ditched there, supposedly dead, touched the bones of Elisha and got better again. Okay, so after this story of the dead man coming back to life after touching Elisha's bones, then we get to verse 22. King Hazael of Aram had oppressed Israel during the reign of King Jehoahaz. But the Lord was gracious and merciful to the people of Israel, and they were not totally destroyed. He pitied them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And to this day he still has not completely destroyed them or banished them from his presence. King Hazael of Aram died, and his son Ben-Hadad became the next king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns that had been taken from Jehoash's father, Jehoahaz. Jehoash defeated Ben-Hadad on 3 occasions, and he recovered the Israelite towns. So, that makes it sound like Jehoash was probably able to, like, recover what had been lost to King Hazael, but perhaps not much more. Or perhaps not gain much more than that. And right there it specifically mentions, I don't know, somewhere down in here it, like, reiterates that there were 3 victories. And that was it. Yeah. Defeated Ben-Hadad on 3 occasions, and he recovered the Israelite towns. And, of course, the whole to this day thing is not obviously to the current day, as we're reading it. It would have been relative to the time of this being written, I would assume. which I honestly couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But I do know there's stuff that happens later on that winds up, overruling, undoing, making that untrue. So I would think it's sometime before that. But let me not get too far ahead of myself and where we are in the Bible. So, yeah. There you go. That is 2 Kings chapter 13. Alright, so, a little bit about a couple of the kings of Israel. The split northern kingdom of Israel. They did not follow God. Unsurprising. Not a single king of Israel has done so since there was the split. One of them at least, prayed to God to ask for help, but he still didn't overall follow God, worship him, or do anything else to really earn God's favor. God, even despite this, still doesn't, entirely wipe the people out. Eventually, they end up in exile, as prophesied before, and, seemingly away from God's presence. I'm going to air quote that because, that's more so based on Old Testament understanding and the temple location and things like that, but I digress. There was also one last prophecy from Elisha before he died about Israel having some victory over the Arameans, which came to pass, of course. Would have been more apparently if Jehoash, if the king at that time had struck the ground more, but it was enough victories to at least reclaim what had been lost to the Arameans. So that's where it kind of left things off for that chapter. So, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description for links to social media pages and all sorts of stuff like that. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts or questions you have. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.